Good morning, Year 8. So we are finished with sequences and we are moving on to statistics, okay? And we're specifically looking at statistical measures. So today it's all about learning keywords, learning their definitions, examples. We're going to look at some advantages and disadvantages of sampling and why we collect data and why we use statistics, okay? So first thing we're going to do is you need to copy down this set of words here, which I will just scroll down here. Okay, so if you could copy that table into your book. So you've got a list of words here that we're going to be using. We're going to look for their definitions and we're going to try and find examples of them. Okay, so that's task 1, and in Show My Homework, in the links section, you will find this link to Maths is Fun. So you can either use that link or you can find a maths dictionary online, or a normal dictionary would be fine, and see how many of these definitions you can find and fill in that table. Okay, so that's really important because we'll be using all of these terms over the next few lessons when I'm referring to statistics. So it's really important that you understand what they mean. And like I said, we'll be learning about disadvantages and advantages of using some of those techniques as well. Okay, so that's task 1. So press pause, go away and do that, and then come back and we'll look at the answers. Okay, so hopefully you've got some of these answers. So first of all, we have that data is a group or a collection of facts or figures or values or measurements. So examples could be heights or car colour or car make, or the number of something, favourite something, number of brothers and sisters, anything like that is data. So we then have 2 types of data. We have primary data and secondary data. So primary data is data that's been collected by a first-hand source, usually yourself. So best way to think of it is data that's been collected by you. So that might be a survey or a questionnaire, or you might have done an experiment in science, for example. Okay. Secondary data is data that's been collected by someone else. Okay, normally not necessarily somebody you know, and often collected for a different reason, but you're going to use it. So you might find that on the internet, or you might find that in newspapers or in books. Okay, so that's secondary data. Okay, and we'll look later about which is better out of those 2. Then we have the different types of data. So data can be split into quantitative and qualitative. Difficult words to say, so they've got so many T's in them. But quantitative is like the word quantity, and quantity means an amount. So quantity is numerical information. Okay, so it might be weight, it might be shoe size, it might be the number of cars that pass your school. All of those are quantitative. And qualitative is descriptive data, so it's normally words. Okay, so non-numerical, so it might be your eye colour, your favourite food, your favourite pet, all of those things are qualitative. Okay, now the quantitative data can be split into 2 types. We can have discrete and continuous. So discrete is data that takes specific values. Okay, so often it's counting data, so it's the number of things, number of siblings, number of cars that pass the school gate, number of Smarties in a tube. There are a couple of examples where it's not a counting piece of data though. So shoe size can only take whole numbers and half numbers. So you can have shoe size 1 and 1.5 and 2, but you can't have shoe size 1.4. So shoe size is discrete, and money or cost of things can be discrete as well. Okay, continuous data is data that can take a range of values, so it's often measurements. So leg length can be 32 centimetres, or it might be 32.1 centimetres, or it might be 32.11 centimetres. Okay, so it's continuous. You can keep changing the accuracy and get a more accurate measurement. Okay, so continuous is often a measurement. Discrete is often counting. Okay, but like I say, for discrete, there's a couple of anomalies in there. Okay, so a sample is a smaller group of data that's intended to represent the whole population. Okay, so for example, if you had a school of 300, you might just look at 30 pupils from that 300. You wouldn't necessarily get all 300, you just choose 30, and that 30 is a sample. A census, okay, is a collection of information from all people and households available. Okay, so it's when you take the data from everybody in that population that you're looking at. So an example is every 10 years the government do a census on all sorts of information, but everybody in the country has to take part. So it's getting all the data about absolutely everybody. Okay, a sample is only getting data from a small group to see if that represents the whole population. So a couple of other words. Compare is when we relate one thing to another via data or chart. So you might compare averages, you might compare to pie charts, you might compare to bar charts and so on. Okay, and an outlier is a value that does not follow the pattern of the other data or fit within an acceptable range. So an example here is a year 7 pupil with a height of 14.3 metres. Okay, well, if you think that a bus is 3 metres high, you're unlikely to have a pupil that's 14.3 metres high. So that's an outlier. It suggests that something's not quite right. Okay, so hopefully if you had any of those bits of information missing, you can just update your table. So I suggest you pause at the relevant point and just copy down what you need to into your table. So you've got that information, but you do need to know those words and be able to use those words. Okay, so first little task is to see if we understand the difference between discrete and continuous data. So it'd be good to copy that table into your book, and then just below the table I've got lots of different types of data. Okay, and what I want you to do is to decide which column they go in. So shoe size, is that discrete or is that continuous? Okay, the time it takes the kettle to boil, is that discrete or is that continuous? So press pause, okay, have a go, and then we'll have a look at the answers in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to do that. Make sure you understand, but we'll just check through. So shoe size, as I mentioned before, is one of those ones, it's not counting data, but it is discrete because you can only take certain values. You can only be 3 or 3.5 or 4. Okay, you can't be 3.2. Okay, the time it takes the kettle to boil, well, time is a measurement and that is continuous. Okay. The number of sides on a polygon, well, again, that's counting, so that's going to be discrete. You can't have 2.5 sides. The number of boys in a class, again, that's counting, so that's going to be discrete. The temperature in the room, well, that's continuous because you're measuring something. And volume is also a measurement, so that's continuous. The height of some pupils, well, again, height is continuous because it's a measurement. The speed of a lorry, that's continuous because that's a measurement. The cost of a laptop, right, so cost is one of those things. If we're going to a shop, then laptops do have fixed prices to 2 decimal places, so it is going to be discrete. But there are instances when actually it can be continuous. But in this case, we're considering it in a shop at a fixed price. It can only be to 2 decimal places, so that's discrete. Weight of banana is continuous because that's a measurement. Foot length, that's a measurement. And the number of pets you own, that's discrete. So hopefully you've got a few of those in the right columns. Just correct any that you didn't get right. And what I'd like you to do now is to go onto MathsWatch. And I've put a little assignment on there called discrete or continuous. So have a quick go. Now we've seen some of the examples here, you've probably got a good chance of recognising them on the MathsWatch assignment. So go and get that done. There's only a few questions on there. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. So you could get that done. So Okay, so now we're just going to focus a little bit on primary and secondary data, and we're going to look at advantages and disadvantages. So primary data, we've already said, is collected by yourself. Okay, so you could do that by a survey, by going out and counting the cars past your school, or looking at the speeds of cars, or going to count how many people use a leisure centre. Okay, experiments, so you might be doing experiments in science, or you might do experiments in maths where you roll a dice, or you throw a coin and you look at the results. Data logging, so that might be something, so if you were in a hospital and you might be just recording information such as the weights of newborn babies and taking that data. And then a questionnaire where you write some questions and then you go out and ask people to collect information that way. So there's primary data. Secondary data is often collected by someone else. Often it's not collected for the purpose that you wanted it for. It's somebody else has collected it for their purpose and they've just put their data somewhere for other people to use. So you might find it on the internet, you might find it in a database or spreadsheet, okay? You might find it in a newspaper or a book, okay? So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using primary and secondary data? So primary data initially, well, if you're collecting it yourself, you will collect the data that you require. You're not going to collect anything that you don't need, okay? You will know the data's current, you know it's up to date. You know how accurate you've measured it. So if you've been measuring it to 2 decimal places, you know that. If you've just been rounding it to the nearest whole, you know that. And you have the information about where and when the data was collected, okay? Disadvantages of primary data is it takes time, okay? It will take you time to do it. And also the data you get will often need organising because it's raw data. You will need to put it into groups or decide if you've got any outliers and remove those. So it will need a bit of work doing to it as well. Okay. Secondary data. So the advantages are it's often quick to find, especially now with the internet. You can go on, you can look up most things. It's ready to use. You don't have to organise it and look for outliers because somebody else has already done that. Okay, and it's often quite cheap. Okay, most newspapers are now online, or you could go to libraries and look at books or find it on the internet. So it normally doesn't cost a lot, if anything, to find secondary data. So the disadvantages. It might not be the exact data you needed. So it might have been collected for a different reason to what you want to use it. So it might not necessarily be in the form that you wanted it. The reliability could be questioned because you don't know where or when or how it was collected, or even how accurate it was collected. So we said here about we know how we've measured it. You don't know whether it was rounded before it was published, okay? So you don't know the reliability of it. And also, it might be old data or out-of-date data, okay? So you need to be aware of these. So what I suggest is you just copy that table into your notes, okay? Because in questions in GCSE papers, they often ask about which would be the best data to use and why, okay? So you just need to be aware of those advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so press pause and get that into your notes. Okay, so we're going to finish looking at samples. So if you remember, a sample is a group taken from the population that you hope will represent the population. But you could take a large sample, you could take a small sample. So we're just going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of large and small samples. So, number one, if you collect a large sample, it will be more representative of the population. The results are likely to be more accurate. Okay. The disadvantage is that this would take more time, effort, so put a comma in there, more time, effort, and maybe more expensive to carry out. Okay. But because it's larger, it will be more like the population, which is what we're interested in. If you collected a small sample, it would take less time, be easier to collate and may cost less, but it may not give you a true representation of the full population. Okay, so again, just get that into your notes so that you understand the difference. And again, there are often questions in GCSE papers about, often they ask what's wrong with the sample, and the answer is often it's too small a sample. So it's just worth knowing the disadvantages and advantages of large and small samples. Okay, so that's the end of today's lesson. Tomorrow, or in the next lesson, we're going to be looking at some averages. So you will be useful to have a calculator with you tomorrow. Okay, have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.